Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kerzner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you for joining us. The topic for today's podcast is what's your presence process? And I want to welcome my guest host for today, Zen Benefiel. Zen is a possibilities coagulator. He's an author, a minister, and a facilitator. So Zen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Paul. I'm very blessed to be here.
I think it would be helpful for my audience to get a little bit better of an understanding of where you've come from, who you are, and maybe where you're headed. So if you give yourself a little bit of an introduction, that would be really helpful.
I'll do my best to make it a little bit of an introduction. Started in pre-med early on, just out of high school, had a really bizarre near-death experience that took me into the white light and beyond and brought me back, which gave me an initial understanding, and also the following year put me in the hospital because my parents were a little bit concerned about me, and I totally get it now, didn't then. Went from there, got married, got 4 kids. I've got soon to be 9 grandchildren. I just had my first great-grandchild. I've been in various industries from aerospace, education, theater, road and bridge construction as a facilitator, project manager, events. I did the Tempe Arts Festivals for the decade of the 90s and Tempe block parties, 250,000 people in one night. I was one of 5 people who put that all together. And you really have to have a presence and in that kind of place. I seem to be able to jump in the middle of chaos and find order.
How?
That's the question that I've asked myself to help make it repeatable. What I find is that when I'm first confronted with anything, I just stop and I take a breath and I ask, what's this about? And then I pause and I wait for a sensation. And then that sensation, initially the sensation is not necessarily articulable. I think that's the word. And yet over time, when I began to understand the sensations and equate those with different emotions and responses and ways to communicate, it made it easier for me. And of course, I'm talking about being an empath as well. Didn't understand that as a kid, and yet had to find those places that I could differentiate myself from others. And oftentimes I wanted to take all of those sensations and feelings and make it my own. And in order to deal with it, I had to. Because I had to know how to work with those feelings and emotions and thoughts in order to find the prudent path through it.
I think that this topic alone is interesting to a lot of people because it's common for many people to be empathic and not understand why they feel the way they do, why they can walk into a room or an office and all of a sudden they went from feeling great to feeling terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, and so
well, we're not taught these things in school, right? But the mind-body-spirit complex is really not considered as a holistic system, which we are. And some of us find our way through books or workshops or gurus or whatever, and some just kind of blaze the trail on their own because they don't know any difference. And they've just got the ability to do so. They've got the perseverance, they've got the stamina, they've got the consciousness, and they've got the faith, love, and trust in themselves to do so.
So with that being said, what was or is your process as you go throughout your life to make sure that what you're feeling is you and what other people are feeling is theirs, How do you develop and differentiate boundaries? And how do you stay present, more importantly, in that process?
Now this took decades, right? From being completely quiet and feeling like an emotional sponge and wanting to go hide in a corner, to being able to stand in front of hundreds of people and deliver a presentation that is based on interaction with them. Right? I'm not a sage on stage. I'm not a talking head. I interact with my audience because it's more fun and they get more out of it too. And it puts me in a place where I challenge myself to let go and just be in that present moment and allow it to flow. Now, again, that took decades to develop. It doesn't happen overnight. But initially, there was this, okay, I'm feeling this. I got to talk about it. So there's an authenticity involved in reflecting what you're feeling and asking the other person what's going on without projecting or infecting that current conversation with stuff that doesn't belong, because you don't want to make them be defensive. Because as soon as that happens, the conversation's over. Because all of a sudden the energy shifted. Now you're trying to catch up and soothe ruffled feathers rather than speak from that authentic place and get a clear reflection from the other person.
Yeah, projection is definitely a presence distraction for sure.
Sure.
Projection will always pull you out of the present moment because more often than not, you're taking memories of the past or worries of the future and you're placing that directly onto someone else.
I had a wonderful mentor. His name's Jerome Allen Landau, and he's an attorney. He gives workshops on alternate dispute resolution at the UN. So he's a pretty high-level guy. I've known him for about 30 years. He said to me in the process of learning, in our conversation about this presence and how to engage conversation with the least amount of distraction as possible. And one of the things that he said to me is we all show up with a different dictionary to the same conversation. So we're pulling those meanings of the words we're hearing from our dictionary. The trick is to ask questions of others to understand their dictionary, because ours is useless at that point.
That's certainly one way to eliminate any projection, because that way you're allowing that other person to tell you exactly how they feel.
And these kinds of conversations are often intimidating for people to engage in because it doesn't happen often, even in family units.
So it's easier to project than it is to sit down and inquire.
And, and we often take the easy road, right? Well, as I've found over the years, the easier road for me now is to speak up, to say stuff, to recognize what I see in another's eyes, to recognize what I'm feeling, to acknowledge what I observe in another when there's a question and I see their vision or their gaze go to the right or the left or up, kind of like NLP, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily to critique what they're doing, just to acknowledge what's happening, because most people aren't even aware of what they're doing.
So what you're talking about is holding space, holding presence for another, which is definitely a great presence process.
Well, as a life coach, which is one of my professions now, this is part of what I have to do. I've got a couple master's degrees in business as well. And I've written 18 books now. The big book, Zen or the Contrarian, is a seminal view of consciousness, cosmology, and the congruence of science and spirituality. So it's a story of how I've discovered all of these things and questions that are still yet to be answered.
So maybe you can provide me with a little bit of an explanation as to what a possibilities coagulator is.
Well, a possibilities coagulator, in a nutshell, is one who puts people, places, and things together to do stuff.
You're a connector.
Much more. Okay, connectors just put people together. I make it happen. Okay, so as a coordinator or as a coagulator, I get people to work together better. I flesh out what their needs are in a project. I help others that need to perform in order to meet those needs perform better. So it's this dance that whether it's 20 people or 80 people, and I had a $500 million project. I had 80 people in a room that I'm working on this process with, which was quite the challenge. Because everybody still needs to be heard, and yet in those kinds of instances, when you are present enough to ask the questions and pause yourself and not try to answer them yourself, there are people in the room that will take the next step, and it could be a collective next step because they're now a mouthpiece for others who are thinking or feeling the same thing. Now, in smaller groups, you can have much more of a live interaction with that because there's smaller groups, smaller numbers. But when you've got 80 people in a room, that can really take a long time and you lose the attention of those. And these are engineers and quality guys and designers and inspectors and, construction guys that don't have much patience.
So how do you stay present when you're interacting with all these different people that are all trying to accomplish the same thing but ultimately have different tasks?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I could really answer it other than I've learned how. Because being empty in that moment, because my agenda has nothing to do with it. I'm a third-party neutral by fact in facilitating that meeting. So I have no agenda other than to get these guys to work together better, to streamline the processes, to resolve any known issues, create issue resolution plans, and make sure that those are fulfilled and implemented when necessary. So it's kind of a convoluted process because it goes from being completely empty to being completely full when things need to happen. And the history that I have in working with groups and people and places and things across multiple industries, I think that kind of tends to build a skill set that gets tapped when necessary. And it's like, you're carrying a quiver of arrows and you just happen to pull out the right arrow at the appropriate time because it's been asked for.
It's an interesting analogy with the quiver of arrows. I think it's also a good moment for me to talk a little bit about what my presence process is and how I'm able to stay present, and then maybe we can reflect on what yours is on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
But for me, my mindfulness program, my mindfulness exercise in the morning, including guided meditations, writing affirmations, reading different inspirational things, creates the opportunity for me to start my day and move throughout my day with presence. So I'm able to reflect back to that when I get involved in certain situations that are challenging, that require me to either think of the past or shoot myself into the future. I really try to simplify that in that fact that if I can lay the groundwork and create the baseline, then as I go throughout my day and my life, that I'm able to hold that space, create that container, and stay within those boundaries of the present moment, so that I can hold space for others, so that I can keep them also in the here and now, and that we can work together, so that I'm not projecting, and I'm not inferring, and I'm not suggesting, so that I can speak clearly. To me, that's been the most opportune way for me to achieve and obtain presence as I go throughout my day. And, there's definitely some variability for sure. I feel very blessed that the work that I do, as a licensed acupuncturist, as a presence coach, is that I'm constantly talking about presence anyway.
You're living it.
So, yeah, exactly. So I get to walk the talk.
So others are at a disadvantage around you.
That's one perception.
Right.
I would say others are at an advantage of being around me because they can feel, they can see,
absolutely,
they can sense what presence is.
I opened the door for you on that one.
Well, thank you. I
You're welcome.
appreciate that. But we need more people walking the talk.
Absolutely.
And that's what this is all about. And it's important to air out and find out what other people are doing in other industries and how they're able to achieve presence, especially in the most challenging of moments, because it's so easy to become distracted. And that's why I'm trying to peer into how you're able to stay present when you're working on billion-dollar deals with tons of people who are trying to do different things at their own pace and have their own fears and their own concerns.
One of the terms that I introduce, besides the whole we go thing, the ego's left at the door, it's all we go in here, is jobarchy. So as a term, jobarchy, I see it and you're like, what? I've never heard that before. Jobarchy is just like any other archy, except the job is the boss.
It's an interesting way to look at it, yeah.
So whatever the job needs, whatever the specs are, if there's some value engineering, if there's something that can be done better for less, that's included. But the job's the boss. So all the personalities don't matter at that point. It's what is best to meet the schedule, budget, specifications, and teamwork for it. Now, when you were talking about your morning process, I can remember, even as a kid, I would start the morning with some kind of really high energy, positive music that reflected my attitude, even in high school. I went through phases where I was writing affirmations, I was journaling, I had my room plastered with affirmations to the point where people would come in and it's like, dude, do you think you got enough of these? And I said, well, they're all reminders, because you never know in the moment when you're thinking about something or you're becoming distracted, your eyes will go. It's like looking for something, right? And you can't find it. Then all of a sudden you speak out loud about it and your eyes are automatically taken to the object that you're looking for. And it's an unconscious, subconscious, maybe not even conscious thing that happens. But we do that, right? And oftentimes we're like, wow, that was cool. But we don't do anything more with the practice of that, because you were just shown how to do it, right? So the same thing with affirmations and with where your eyes go in that process. Now I've got to a place where about 4 or 5 years ago, I started waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with these really vivid participatory dreams and conversations. And I got to a place where it's like, oh, come on, I just want to go back to sleep. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is happening. It's a natural process. Why fight it? Just let it flow. So as I started to do that and practice that presence with it, then by the end of all of it, I had many answers that I'd been looking for and marching orders for the day.
And you touched upon something that's actually really important, is the resistance or not resisting the present moment. And that's a topic that I talk about a lot, is that when
we always got stuff to do.
Yeah. When you create that, but when you
Wait a minute, hang on, I got to go do this. Now I'll talk to you. Okay.
When you create that resistance, you get pulled right out of the moment. You almost tell the moment that I know better, and that I'm going to do whatever it is I want to do.
I had a conversation with a 31-year-old guy at a softball tournament that I was visiting my kids just recently. And my daughter and her husband put this fundraising softball tournament together, and they had a hog roast. So they had this container that was roasting a hog, and this guy and I started talking. Never would have dreamed in 1,000 years or whatever that I would have had this conversation with him. But we sat down and we started going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I found out that he'd known my daughter, and my daughter had told him that he sounded like me. So that was comforting. But he mentioned something that totally blew me away. Ohms Law. You know what that is?
No.
It has to do with electricity. What are we? What flows through us? Do we resist it? Ohm's law is functional to the capacity that we resist. If we don't resist things, there's a natural flow and order there. So he just brought that right back around into the science side of things. And I thought, wow, that was really brilliant. And to be gifted with that in that conversation just really made my day.
As I go throughout my day and as I work with patients, it's interesting, to touch upon resistance, to touch upon presence, to touch upon having just this a simple view of what life truly is and how to navigate it. As human beings, we have such varied experiences.
And with your experience, especially with the acupuncture and working with the bodies, you observe, or at least can, I'm going to make an assumption here because of your presence, you observe where resistance happens, blocked energy, you can see it in the bodies, you know where the sensations are, and you probably even get your clients to describe the sensations that they're feeling with that blockage or flow or shift that is happening in process with you. Same thing with coaching. I watch micro expressions, right? Don't lie to me. Remember the show? Micro expressions are like gold when you're working with someone and you're reflecting on those empathic feelings, because you can reflect with them and get them to become more self-aware. Mm-hmm. And that's really the target. It doesn't matter what another person tells you unless you are self-aware enough to be authentic and present with it.
I think that self-awareness is definitely the key, but the question is how to achieve that. And that's why I provide presence tools. Okay, so people can use that in the moment, and they're not like automatons. Mm-hmm. They're aware of what they do, why they do it. They're aware of what they say and how they behave. And so they're able to identify their thoughts, their words, how everything's affecting them.
And they feel safe in the vulnerability of sharing that with you. That's a key factor, because we don't often feel safe enough to do that. It's like I was asked what my superpower is the other day, and I said, it's vulnerability.
Not a common superpower.
No.
By any means.
And yet it's probably one of the most practical ones to have when you're learning and growing into the living in the presence that we are.
So what is your presence process? Do you have something that you do every day that you start your day with?
I start my day with thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Gratitude.
As soon as I'm conscious. Now this is, the day starts before that because, as I said, I'm having these video vignettes, if you will, that are going on within my mind as I'm watching, and sometimes I'm participating, sometimes I'll ask a question, and then I'll just watch what takes place, because my questions are usually about different things that I'm engaged with now, because I play on a lot of different levels. I've got a co-host a radio show. I've got independentarizona.com, so I'm kind of politically involved. I want to help change the world, and there's some practical things that I can do to help facilitate that. Then there's the partnering workshops. Then there's relationships and family members and, and all this kind of stuff. So as this all bubbles up and it becomes, it shares itself one piece at a time, then I'm able to work with it, see it in a different light. A little bit clarity is important in that instance, because there's no projection of what I want to happen. It's what's best and then what I have to do in order to put myself in the place to perform. Right? Because nothing happens if you don't show up. So if you're willing to show up, then things will happen. It may not be perfect, but it'll get better.
Yeah, and that comes with acceptance for sure.
Yeah, and the more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. So that's how the morning starts, with the gratitude. And then I go outside and I face the 4 directions and I raise my hands and I welcome the energy, and it's another thank you, thank you, thank you, just for all that I am, have, and am about to become.
Gratitude is an amazing presence tool. It truly is. It can be done at any time. Sometimes I recommend people spend some time in the morning or any time throughout their day just writing about something that they're really grateful for, or a list of things that they're grateful for, because there's nothing that's going to shift you quicker than when you shift your attention onto things that truly make you happy. So, well,
and in those moments too, that we can't live a solitary. It is possible to live a solitary, happy life. However, encountering daily experiences, you're going to be confronted with different things at different levels, and it's going to trigger you in different ways. The essence of being able to walk through that is being able to maintain that presence. It's difficult to feel gratitude when you've just gotten hit with a rock, because the first thing you want to do is react, right? And yet there's the practice of, oh, I'm glad that didn't hit me in the eye, or I'm glad that didn't hit anybody else, because it just bruised me. It might have, the old lady sitting next to me, it could have killed her, right?
Yeah. You just never know.
Right.
Yeah. Zen, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been
You're welcome.
Really enlightening podcast. If people are interested in learning more about you, how can they find you? Where do they find you?
Well, I made it actually simple. For years, I did not get my name as a domain name, but I finally did about a year ago. So I've got a digital vitae up there. It's Zen Benefiel.com.
Why don't you spell that out?
Spelled out, it's ZenBenefiel.com.
Perfect. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want you all to think about, what your presence process is and how you can change that. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.